Welcome to the Make It a Better Day podcast. I'm Alex, and we're here to explore practical ways to bring more light, joy, and meaning into our everyday lives. Before we dive in, I'd love for you to take a moment to reflect. When was the last time you consciously looked for a bright spot in your day?
And I'm Victoria. That's such a powerful question to start with because it really sets up what we're exploring today. We're diving into an incredible article called Illuminating Hope, Finding Light in Life's Darkest Moments, and it couldn't be more relevant to what many of our listeners are experiencing.
You know, before we even get into the article, I noticed you nodding as you mentioned the title. Did it resonate with something in your own experience?
It absolutely did. About 3 years ago, I went through what I can only describe as a perfect storm. My long-term relationship ended. I was battling burnout at work, and then my dad got seriously ill. I remember standing in my kitchen one morning, trying to make coffee and just feeling completely overwhelmed by it all.
That sounds incredibly challenging. How did you navigate through that time?
Well, that's where today's central quote really hits home. Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if one only remembers to turn on the light. When I first read this in the article, it stopped me in my tracks because it so perfectly captured my journey.
Let's pause there for a moment because that quote really is the heart of this piece. What strikes me is how it puts the emphasis on remembering to turn on the light, not waiting for someone else to do it for us. How do you interpret that?
For me, it's about active choice. During my rough patch, I realized I had to actively search for those light switches. And you know what's fascinating? They weren't these grand gestures or life-changing moments. They were tiny things that added up over time.
Can you give us an example? What was one of your first light switches?
It was a detour. I started taking a different route to work that went past this little park. Every morning, I'd stop for just 5 minutes to watch the ducks on the pond. Some days, that 5 minutes felt like stealing time from my overwhelming to-do list, but it became this moment of peace I could count on.
That reminds me of something powerful from the article. The section about J.K. Rowling writing Harry Potter on cafe napkins while her baby slept. Sometimes hope starts in these seemingly insignificant moments, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and speaking of inspiring stories, the article mentions Malala Yousafzai too. Here's someone who faced unimaginable darkness and not only found her light, but used it to illuminate the path for others. Did you know that after her recovery, she would wake up every morning terrified but chose to go to school anyway?
That's incredible. Though I think it's important to note, as the article emphasizes, that we don't need to compare our struggles to others. Every person's darkness is valid, wouldn't you say?
Completely agree. In fact, one of our listeners, Sarah, shared a beautiful story about this on our website. Do you mind if I share it?
Please do.
Sarah wrote about feeling guilty for struggling with work-from-home isolation during the pandemic because she knew others had it worse. But then she started what she called her light list, writing down one moment of light she experienced each day, no matter how small. Want to hear some of her entries?
Absolutely.
The way sunlight hit my coffee mug this morning. My neighbor's kid drawing hopscotch on the sidewalk. Finding my grandmother's old recipe card in a cookbook. These small moments became her anchors.
That's such a perfect lead-in to discussing the practical strategies the article suggests. Let's break these down for our listeners. What stood out to you?
The first one that really grabbed me was the gratitude practice. The article suggests starting with just 3 things each day, but there's a twist. They have to be different each time. No repeats for at least a week. It really pushes you to look deeper.
I actually started doing this about 6 months ago. Want to hear something fascinating about what I've discovered?
Please share.
At first, I thought I'd run out of things after a week or two. But the opposite happened. I started seeing gratitude opportunities everywhere. Yesterday, I wrote down the way my coffee smelled in the morning, a text from my sister that made me laugh, and the satisfaction of finally fixing that squeaky door that's been driving me crazy.
That's the perfect example of training your brain to look for light. The article also talks about mindfulness. How do you think these two practices connect?
They're deeply interconnected. When you're practicing mindfulness, you're fully present in the moment, which makes it easier to notice those small joys. The article suggests starting with just 1 minute of focused breathing. I tried this during an incredibly stressful workday last week. Want to hear what happened?
Yes, please tell us.
So, everything was going wrong. Deadline pressures, technical issues, you name it. I remembered the article's suggestion and just stopped for 1 minute to focus on my breathing. It didn't solve my problems, but it created this tiny space between me and the chaos. Sometimes that's all we need.
That reminds me of another strategy the article mentions: engaging in soul-nourishing activities. I'm curious, what lights you up? What's your go-to activity when you need to find that inner spark?
For me, it's definitely photography. Even if I just take 10 minutes to photograph something simple, like the way light falls through my kitchen window, it shifts something in my perspective. What about you?
Cooking became my light switch. There's something about the creativity of it, the focus it requires. Even on my worst days, making a simple meal from scratch helps me feel grounded. And here's something interesting. I started sharing my cooking journey on social media, just honest posts about how creating meals was helping me heal. The responses were incredible.
What kind of responses did you get?
People started sharing their own stories of finding light through creativity. One follower, Michael, told me he started baking bread during his depression, and kneading dough became this powerful physical reminder that he could create something positive with his hands.
These stories really bring to life what the article says about how our personal light can inspire others. Speaking of which, let's talk about today's challenge for our listeners.
Yes, the article presents a beautiful but simple challenge, engaging in one joy-bringing activity today. But let's make this really concrete for our listeners. Instead of saying, "I'll exercise more," maybe it's, "I'll dance to my favorite song while making breakfast."
I love that approach. And remember, it should be something that feels authentic to you. For some people, it might be calling an old friend. For others, it could be spending 5 minutes sketching in a notebook. The key is making it specific and achievable.
Exactly. And we'd love to hear what light switches our listeners discover. Share your experiences with us using #MakeItABetterDay on social media.
Make sure to visit our Redbubble store, where we have inspiring designs for all of our articles, including today's.
Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear, what's one small way you're planning to turn on the light today?
You know what? I'm going to take a page from your book. On my lunch break, instead of eating at my desk, I'm going to find a sunny spot in the park and really savor my meal. Sometimes the simplest changes can make the biggest difference.
That's beautiful. And speaking of making a difference, remember that our website has additional resources related to today's topic and many more articles.
Let's end by returning to that powerful quote one more time. Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if one only remembers to turn on the light. Remember, you have the power to create moments of light in your life, no matter what challenges you're facing.
Thank you all for joining us today on the Make It a Better Day podcast. Keep shining your light, and we'll see you next time.